Iowa City is a unique community. This uniqueness is shaped by the people who contribute their ideas, their time, and their energy to the life of Iowa City and the university. Welcome to a series of biographical interviews of special women and men who have affected this community. Their contributions have been valuable, their lives creative and full. What brought them here? Who influenced them? What changes in their field have they been a part of? These and other questions will be explored during this series of interviews entitled, Tell Me Your Story. Professor Margaret Keyes is a name synonymous with the University of Iowa's most revered building, Old Capitol. Professor Keyes was the director of the Old Capitol Restoration Project and for over 20 years worked at uncovering the past of Iowa's first state capitol. With degrees in home economics, art and design, interior design, and housing, she began teaching at the University of Iowa in 1951. Professor Keyes has received many honors over her long and distinguished career, an honorary Doctor of Humanities degree from Cornell College in 1976. In 1987, she was named Preservation Person of the Year, given by the Historic Preservation Commission. And in 1989, she was awarded the University of Iowa Alumni Association's Distinguished Friend of the University. Professor Keyes is the author of numerous articles and 2 books, 19th Century Home Architecture of Iowa City and Old Capitol, Portrait of an Iowa Landmark. She's been involved in other restoration projects, served on the Terrace Hill Planning Commission, which is the governor's mansion, and served as a consultant during a renovation project on the Cornell campus. She currently serves as chair of the State Historical Society of the Iowa Board of Trustees. Margaret, it is a wonderful opportunity and pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Let's start your story in Mount Vernon, where you were born in 1918, and tell me about your grandparents and your parents.
I should probably say my grandfather was not living when I was born. My grandmother, Keyes, was. My parents both went to Cornell College. Dad graduated there in 1894, and then came back after education at Harvard, came back to Cornell on the staff and was there for 38 years until 1941.
What did your father teach?
He taught German language and literature and chaired the modern language department.
And did your mother teach also?
No. Mother was what they say was a homemaker.
Homemaker, and raised, you told me before the interview, 2 daughters. You have an older sister.
Yes, Catherine, 13 years older than I. She started to college when I started to kindergarten, so we said our parents raised 2 only children.
Well, your grandfather, I read in an article, built houses in Mount Vernon.
That's right.
Tell me about that.
He was what they called a carpenter builder. And in the winter, then he would build furniture because you didn't construct around the clock around the year, as they do now. But many of the big old homes are grandfather's houses. And whether it's in the genes that I became in architecture, so. I don't know. But I always had wished that I knew him. And so I wrote an article about him and his houses.
Who kept track of the houses in Mount Vernon that were built by him?
Well, some of it was in family archives, some newspaper articles, some I found, well, of course I researched Lynn County, deed records, things like that. And it's amazing what will come up when you go to those sources. Did
your father enjoy having his daughter be so interested in 19th century architecture like his father had been?
I don't think he knew it because he died in 1951, and that was the year I came here. And I really began studying architecture after I came here.
Okay, we'll get to that very soon. You received your BA from Cornell.
Yes.
So father and daughter and mother both went, all 3?
And sister.
And sister. Your sister went to Cornell.
Yes.
And then you got your MS from the University of Wisconsin and your PhD from Florida State University. Yes. And then you taught for a few years in Stanley and Clinton. What made you decide to teach at the college level?
Well, the job just dropped into my lap.
Ooh.
I had just completed a master's degree at Wisconsin, and I had a call from the chairman of the home economics department here, wondering if I'd be interested in college teaching here at the university. Someone had given her my name. So with that, we had an interview, and suddenly I was leaving high school teaching and coming into the college scene.
What area of home ec was your specialty?
Interior design, housing. I guess I always have been interested in how people decide what they surround themselves with, what their interests are, things as basic as color, styles of furniture, the house they choose to live in. And I just got into that as my specialty within home economics.
What provoked you, or when did you start digging into Iowa history and the architecture of Iowa City?
Well, it was the colleague that I worked with, Lula Smith, whom many people knew. And I think I was sort of casting around for a research project. And she said, you know, with your interest in design, housing, why don't you do something about these old houses in Iowa City that are disappearing? And that's where it started.
And then you did your dissertation on architecture in Iowa City?
Yes, yes. I began researching the Iowa City houses about 1958, and it became the topic of my doctoral dissertation at Florida State. And I received my degree in '65, and then the University of Iowa Press decided it was an interesting topic. And so
the camera can pick it up. That's the result, right?
It includes many of the houses that are in my dissertation.
How did you dig for that? Who were some of your resources for 19th century home architecture of Iowa City?
Who or what or
where did you go? Where did you go? I know when I was leafing through there, it seemed like you got a lot of your wonderful pictures from Fred Kent.
Yes, yes, I did. But before that, I drove up and down every street in Iowa City. And I think finally people knew when they saw this yellow and white car that I was driving then that that woman is around looking at houses. And I did identify practically all of the 19th century houses. I was looking for certain styles. I knew what I was looking for. And with that, I went on and put an X on the map, and then that meant go back and check this one. It's especially interesting for some reason. From that, I went on to legal records at the courthouse, spent hours down there, and had wonderful cooperation. They were interested in what I was doing, too. And I was trying to think, what was the next step? Well, there were so many steps that fell into order, and some things I did simultaneously. And then they were photographed. Then I met Fred Kent one day at the mailbox. We were neighbors. And he knew my father because he had done a great deal of photography of Iowa archaeological specimens for Dad. And he said, what are you going to do for a dissertation? And I said, I'm into it, and I'm studying the old houses. And he said, I've been looking for you forever. He said, I have taken pictures of the old houses, and they're back in a file in the back room at the photo lab there. He said, you can just go through them, and you can use anything you want. That was just the proverbial gold mine, wasn't it?
Wasn't, and they're wonderful pictures.
Aren't they?
Wonderful pictures. It's a fascinating book, and it's fun to see that there are so many that have remained.
Well, that's important. Right now, we're doing a follow-up on that book. It's not a book, but it's going to republish the basic information and add a couple chapters to it. We'll add some houses and also some thoughts on preservation and restoration. What's happened to the houses since that study was made?
That's just, I'd like to hear about how, I understand how this came about, but how did your involvement in Old Capitol begin? What was the first time that you knew that you might be doing this large project?
It was a telephone call from Sandy Boyd. And he said, Margaret, you don't know this, but we're going to restore Old Capitol, and I'm asking you to undertake the research. Will you do it? It was as simple as that.
And what was your off the top of your head answer?
Yes.
Yes.
It was just very direct. I knew I would love doing it. And I had had an office for years in McBride in home economics looking out at that wonderful building. I couldn't quite believe my fortune in being associated with it. Sandy didn't know and I didn't know how long it would take to do it.
Before we get into how long it did take and all the pre-planning, for people who are new, Professor Keyes, give us a little bit of the history of the State Capitol building.
Well, this building was constructed to be the third capital of the territory of Iowa. And the cornerstone was laid in 1839. Then Iowa became a state in 1846. And the building was going up, but it wasn't done yet. And so it was the first state capital of Iowa. And then in 1857, they moved the capital to Des Moines, and the building was given to the university as its first permanent building. They had been existing in rented properties before.
And so this was in the 1850s, you said?
57.
57. What was it? Okay, what did the university use it for? What did you find out in the history of the building?
It was the entire university.
It was the entire?
It was everything. It was there in the middle of that 4-block area, or approximately the middle. And it was offices, it was classrooms. We know that they even had exercise rooms there. We also know there was an armory on the ground floor. Well, there were other uses, but anything, a chapel. That's one of the biggest things, because the house chamber upstairs was the university chapel and mandatory chapel every day.
In that one building. It's quite remarkable.
Oh, I know, we should mention, it also housed the first Iowa City fire station on the ground floor.
My goodness, it doesn't seem that big.
It isn't.
It isn't that. Okay, what did you do you didn't know how long this was going to take.
No.
But how did you prepare? What kind of preparation did you do as you started this project?
Well, the first thing that happened, I told Sandy I'd have to have help, because I was teaching a full schedule. And so I began with 2 research assistants, graduate students. And we simply started scouring the journals of the House and the Senate from the very beginning. And that means going back to territorial days, because we wanted to know about the planning. What were they doing when they were in Burlington? That was the first territorial capital down there. And how did they plan for it? Then what did they think they would do? Did they do it? All this came out of House journals and Senate journals. Now, there were dozens of other sources that we went to, but we started with that. And I think we had over 700 sources when we finished.
How many students were helping you?
Well, I started with 2, and then for a while I would have just 1. And then I had developed a course in historic restoration, because students in our department would say, well, I know you're doing something, but what are you doing and how are you doing it? And they were intrigued. And I listed in the book all the students who did projects relative, say, to furnishing a specific room. That was a good project for interior design students. And I had at least 18 or 19 graduate assistants, and approximately as many did work for credit. So Old Capitol became a laboratory. And then 2 graduate students did their master's theses on Old Capitol.
How long did the renovation take?
Well, we began in 70. That was when the call came from Sandy. And we opened the building in 76. And it wasn't finished yet, but it was ready to open as part of the university's bicentennial projects. And then we're still doing things.
Yes, I want to talk about that. What were the major things that had to be done? I mean, where did you start first?
When they started the actual restoration, we started in the house chamber and took all the plaster off the walls. And that grew to the point we took all of the interior plaster off because it was in such awful condition. It was peeling, cracking, so on. We thought for a while we only had the money for the house chamber. That's why we started there. But then through a fundraising campaign, through the University Foundation, we found we could do the whole interior. Now this essentially is a restoration of the interior because there wasn't much that had to be done to the exterior. Not much at all. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's why an interior designer got involved in it.
Wonderful. So you started with the house chambers, and
yes.
then where did you move to?
Well, probably we went to the halls and crossed the hall to the Senate chamber and so on, then the first floor. We did not do any restoration on the ground floor.
There was a mystery about the floor plan. You were trying to, I love that story. Please share that.
Well, you'd think you could find the floor plan. And it didn't turn up anywhere in any of the state archives in Des Moines or here at the State Historical Society, anything like that. So we thought, well, gee, they probably put it in the cornerstone, plans for the building. In fact, we found one printed reference that said, in the cornerstone are all these things, including the plans. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of the last resort there. And we did get permission from Sandy to take out the cornerstone. And that was the stone in the southeast corner of the building. And it says 1840 in it. I guess I misspoke a minute ago when I said 1839. The cornerstone was laid in 1840, and it says so right on the stone. So we weren't going to hide anything from anyone, and we notified the press, all the media. We notified all the professors in history what we were going to do the building and art history. And so it was done publicly, and they had prepared it, and they moved the stone out. And here is this big, solid stone with nothing in it, no cavity, nothing at all. And of course, we looked down in the areas around the stone, and I remember one of the announcers saying, "What do you expect to find?" And I told him, and then he would say, "And nothing they found." That kept being played back and forth all day. And Sue Hancher, who was the chairman of our committee, was just devastated. She was so disappointed, and she said, "What are we going to do now?" Well, after that, we found in an 1841 journal of the House and also of the Senate a committee account of what they intended to do. This is what they planned to do. And so then it was our job to find out, did they do what they said they intended to do? Did they build the rooms, the partitions, were they the size they indicated? And well, there's a lot about that. They didn't even say right to left. They said the governor's office, the auditor's office, but they didn't say right to left on the west side. We think we're right.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like you're a bit of a detective.
We had to make assumptions. We certainly did.
A lot of detective work in this.
Oh, yes.
This restoration. What do you, looking back at Old Capitol, what were some of the biggest challenges and the biggest surprises?
I think the thing that meant the most to me, other than just getting it ready to open and for the public to see it, was to find out that there was a gallery in the house chamber. There was no visible sign of a gallery. There were no pictures in historical files saying it was ever there, but we kept finding these references. The gallery was cleared because of a disturbance, and one wonderful ad in an Iowa City paper, it said, for a particular event, the gallery would be reserved for ladies. So that's where the ladies were. One student, Steve Dawson, who did his master's thesis on the house chamber, kept finding these things. And so we went ahead and projected, and there had been no plaster taken off. Well, to make the story short, I went away on vacation, came back, and they had taken the plaster off the house chamber walls. And I was there by myself, and here on the left side and the right side were these wonderful sockets filled with brick, which, you know, you don't make sockets into a stone wall unless you are replacing something that was there. And there were sockets, 2 of them on either side. So I called Steve and I said, your research was sound.
Great. Your book, Old Capitol, Portrait of an Iowa Landmark, it's a lovely book with some wonderful anecdotes about Old Capitol that a lot of kids in the late 1900s did some pranks, and I'd love you to share a couple of those.
Well, we'd find references in the old predecessor of the Daily Iowa about men sitting on the portico or sitting upstairs in the windows, ogling the women, which is a wonderful term. A wonderful term. I guess that was a 1920s term, maybe. And also a story about throwing a straw dummy out of the cupola and then replacing it on the ground with a made-up live person. That, you know, nothing had happened, but I'm sure they made it up to the hilt.
A lot of history in front of that Old Capitol. From, I noticed in one of your, I think it was in the Old Capitol book, that was that when Lincoln was shot, there was a gathering in front of Old Capitol and
memorial services.
Memorial service for Lincoln.
And the identical spot where the memorial services for John F. Kennedy were held. And I requested particularly those 2 pictures be on the same page in the book because they're identical types of things. And I'll never forget the Kennedy services.
What about the dedication when you finally opened it to the public? What special thing did you do in 1976?
I did as little as
well, I mean, how did the university do this?
Well, they had a 3-day celebration, and there were many activities went on. And of course, there was the formal dedication. I like to think of it as a rededication because we think probably they did some dedicatory kinds of things when they laid the cornerstone because they had a big celebration then. But we had a wonderful ethnic kind of service. A Chicano nun from Muscatine came up and she gave the opening prayer. Then the benediction was given by a Meskwaki Indian from the Tama settlement. And it all was very moving. And Simon Estes came and sang the Star Spangled Banner. And it was very moving. And why I say I didn't have anything to do, I had said, no, I can't do anything.
You had done it.
I would be full up to here.
Absolutely.
And I was.
And after it opened, you were still renovating and still working. Are there more things going on now at Old Capitol? More projects?
Well, I'm serving as a consultant, and from time to time, people offer us furniture, and we have to determine, is this right for the building? Is it a better antique than we have? Because we have so very little that is original furniture. We've had to replicate many things. We're putting in draperies, and we know they had curtains and draperies. So the first place we put in draperies was in the house chamber. And those are pretty sensational. They change the whole character of the room in the scarlet or crimson color that we use there.
And what about any programs? Are they instigating or instituting new programs?
The building is used a great deal. Just a week doesn't go by that there aren't several functions taking place there, mostly in the Senate chamber. But that's the traditional site for defense of PhD dissertation on the university campus. And there are seminars there. Distinguished speakers come from time to time. The Robert Lucas School every year does the birth of Iowa City. And it's a 2nd grade production. And it's wonderful to see those youngsters playing Chauncey Swan, the founder of Iowa City, you know, one of the ones, and Robert Lucas, the first governor, well, the governor of the territory. But it's a very active place. And I think people love it. And of course, we have the thousands of visitors that go through. The school children, April and May. I think I was told there were something like 4,000 school children through just in April and May this year.
What a wonderful thing to have been a part of. Tell me, looking back, what person or persons had a major influence on you, Margaret?
Well, I'm sure, again, like grandfather's genes, my parents, of course, and my sister, because she was a dedicated scholar. Then I would have to say that the chairman of the department when I was there, who came actually after I was there, Eugenia Whitehead, is the person who said to me, you can conduct research, you can write a PhD dissertation, you can achieve those things. And I guess we all need someone who says you can do it. And then Sandy Boyd, because Sandy challenged me along the way. He challenged me, well, this is sort of personal, but I guess I can tell you. He turned down my promotion to associate professor because he wanted me to be more productive. And I can remember his explaining this to Eugenia Whitehead and me. He came over from his office, and he was the vice president then. He said, Margaret, there are going to be great things ahead. Now, that was prophetic.
That was.
He didn't know, I didn't know. He didn't know he was going to be president at that point. You know, there's so many things that just sort of fill in. So I guess those are some of the people that have challenged me, and maybe that's what we all need.
Challenge you to, you certainly were productive. Looking back at your career, is there a favorite contribution, one that you're most pleased about? Is it the students? Is it your work with Old Capitol?
Well, I'd have to say the students, because so many have gone on to doing outstanding things. One student is curator of properties for the state of Delaware. This Steve Dawson, whom I mentioned, is head of interior design for all the Dayton Hudson stores and Marshall Fields, now that they have taken that over. And he has that responsibility. He says he uses his master's thesis a lot. He refers to it because it's so supportive of what he's doing.
You've touched a lot of students' lives, I can tell.
And I can't ignore Old Capitol because it's there and it's going to be there. And I say that very confidently. It's going to be there.
Tell me, I know you have other interests besides teaching and restoration. What are some of your avocations?
Well, I suppose you could say volunteer work, because my work with the Historical Society is certainly volunteer work. Also, I volunteer at university hospitals 2 afternoons a week in the Day of Surgery Lounge. And maybe this is sort of satisfying my early thought to be a nurse. I don't know.
Did you want to be a nurse
Yes.
when you were growing up
Yes.
in Mount Vernon?
I did. And the first time I did anything like that was during World War II. I was in Clinton, and I was a volunteer, Red Cross nurse's aide. And I went out to Schick General Hospital, the Army hospital there, and worked with the fellows who were being brought back, who were injured. Now, what I do in Day of Surgery, I rarely work with patients, once in a while. But it's so satisfying to be able to help families get through this trying time, the hours that they're waiting for a good report.
Well, your story is wonderfully interesting, and I appreciate you sharing it today.
Well, you're very welcome.
I've been talking to Margaret Keyes, Professor Emeritus in Home Economics at the University of Iowa. Professor Keyes directed research for the restoration of Old Capitol and served as director of this landmark until her retirement in 1988. Professor Keyes has published many articles and 2 books, 19th Century Home Architecture of Iowa City and Old Capitol, Portrait of an Iowa Landmark. She has influenced countless students, has been active in professional organizations, and has supported preservation projects not only in Iowa City, but in Des Moines and Mount Vernon. Professor Keyes serves as chair of the State Historical Society of the Iowa Board of Trustees. And in 1987, the Historic Preservation Commission named her Preservation Person of the Year. And in '89, she was awarded the U of I Alumni Association's Distinguished Friend of the University. The University of Iowa and this community are indeed fortunate that Margaret Keyes chose Iowa City to be her home.